I know that for the most part in your stories, the World Wildlife Fund put out, statements that said, if there are human rights abuses, we would take that very seriously, and we're investigating everything that we know about this, and we don't go along with this at all. And they had said in the past that, that these were the host country employees who were doing this, and they can try to advise and counsel, but it's ultimately not their responsibility. But I think I wondered what degree you were able to engage with them, because I know that I think one of you had told me that for the most part, when you tried to talk to WWF people in country, they asked you a question, like, why are you looking here? Why are you not looking at what Trump is doing? And I think that one of the central questions about your reporting in this whole project that's elicited some of the most interesting discussion in the comments and so on is the whole issue of, well, wait a minute, what about that dead rhinoceros whose horn has been hacked off of it? What about that elephant baby who's crying next to her mother who has been killed? What about the fact that we only have like half a dozen tigers in this place, and they're all going to be gone by next week if these people don't do something about it? They're putting their own lives on the line. And we know that a lot of these eco guards have been killed themselves. They face mortal danger and surely have the right to defend themselves. So can you talk about how you handled those sort of moral questions, those equivalencies, and access to people on the conservation side to talk about their views on this?
Yeah, maybe I can speak a little bit about the first part, and then Tom can talk more about the why aren't you reporting on Trump. I think that something we tried to make really clear in our story is that obviously poaching is a huge problem, and WWF does a lot of really important work on that front. But to use kind of it's not a perfect analogy, but going after these indigenous communities, first of all, it's like trying to solve the drug war by going after the 16-year-old kid on the corner, in America, and saying that murdering him is okay because he might be involved at a very low level. A lot of these communities also, first of all, these are allegations, and in all the cases we reported on, there were suspects of knowing about poaching, and in response to that, they were being allegedly tortured and raped and murdered. But these are not the enemy. These indigenous groups, they're stewards of the areas. They are part of conservation, and even WWF admits that in a lot of its own materials. The poachers doing the most harm are much really powerful, coming in from out of the area and going after these small communities is just not the solution, both because in many cases they're not actually participating, and in the cases where they are, it's because they have no other source of income and no other source of getting food, in part because of the way that conservation has limited them from accessing resources in what is often a very kind of safe and fair way. So it's a very complex problem, and we tried to get that across in our story. But I think what I hope people take away from is that these groups, from the Baka to the Taru, just thousands of miles away from each other, are all facing the same problem. They should be working with conservationists. We should not be trying to we should not be working against them, if that makes sense. And then Tom, maybe you can speak a bit to kind of like the fact that I think this was an open secret, but people didn't want to talk about it because they said, well, we're doing really important work. Yeah, there's this thing where maybe there's some collateral damage, but what about the tigers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, even for us reporting out, and Katie and I would discuss it, it would cause us sleepless nights. Like, I've kind of considered myself an environmentalist, and I was really troubled sometimes. I used to sit there and think, what's going to be the impact of this story? And I think there are different stories that we write. Sometimes they're stories of outright wrongdoing, and sometimes they're just stories of blindness. There is a really human psychological element to journalism and in the things that we report on. And sometimes, because we are so focused on one thing, we can become blind to others. And perhaps this is one of those cases. You know, we met many good people who didn't want to speak to us because they were conservationists, and they said, you know, this isn't, you know, but I mean, the one thing that
so nobody nobody across the board, none of the eco guards, none of the field directors.
We did in fact get breakthroughs where we did. I mean, when you read the stories, obviously you see the reporting in you know, perhaps Cameroon or Nepal, but we were also doing kind of a lot of work both in the US and Europe, because conservationists would go out and work there, and then they'd come back, you know, to wherever they lived, you know.
And we did interview Dominic O'Neill. We did. He granted us an interview. So.
Yeah, he did, you know, and but we were also meeting conservationists who would have.
And for the audience,
every now and again,
Dominic O'Neill?
He's the COO. So we you know, we went to, at the end of our story, obviously we gave WWF a chance to comment, and we went to Geneva where they're based, and we did speak with them just to make it clear that, you know.
No, in the context of the right to reply process, there was conversation, but it was more in, you know, going out and trying to find people like, hey, you were in this park in whatever year when this happened, what do you know about it? And people would say like, oh, you seem like a nice guy, but why are you doing this? Why don't you go and do a story about Donald Trump? Like, Donald Trump is the bad guy. And you know, and it's one of those things, it was just a kind of blindness as to what was going on. You know, people didn't almost want to think about it because they were saving animals. And, you know, it's, you know, it was a real insight into kind of human complexity and how easily we can become blinded to some of our other responsibilities when we were on a mission, you know. So.
Well, in fact, some of the commentators weren't blinded. They said these people deserve it. That's, I mean,
yeah, and
definitely that attitude.
And I think that's the other thing, you know, to say that the only way to stop extinction is to rape, torture, and murder indigenous people. I just think that we have to do better than that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that, you know, we did a story about WWF, but this is a systemic issue in conservation. Other conservation groups have this issue, and it's kind of something that's been discussed around the conservation industry for a very, very long time. But I mean, the one thing I did learn is that some people, particularly commentators underneath stories or on Facebook, certainly love animals more than people. And I can say I got some of the most inventive emails I've ever received after publishing that story. You know, we should drop you in the jungle and you should be hunted by poachers, and, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, we got a lot of interesting communiques after publication.